Chapter 5, Financial IQ Number 3, Budgeting Your Money. My poor dad often advised, live below your means. My rich dad said, if you're going to be rich, you need to expand your means. In this chapter, you will find out why living below your means is not a financially intelligent way to become rich. You will learn about budgeting and that there are two kinds of budgets. One is a budget deficit, and the other is a budget surplus. The reason financial IQ number 3 is so important is because learning how to budget for a surplus is the key to becoming rich and staying rich. A budget is a plan. One of the definitions of the word budget is a plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures. Rich Dad said a budget is a plan. He went on to say, most people use their budget as a plan to become poor or middle class rather than a plan to become rich. Most people operate their lives on a budget deficit rather than a budget surplus. Instead of working to create a budget surplus, many people work to live below their means, which often means creating a budget deficit. The first type of budget, a budget deficit. The definition of a budget deficit in Barron's Finance and Investment Handbook is excess of spending over income, for a government, corporation, or individual. Notice the words excess of spending over income. Spending more than you make is the cause of a budget deficit. The reason so many people operate on a budget deficit is because it's so much easier to spend money than to make money. When faced with a crippling budget deficit, most people choose to cut back on their spending. Instead of cutting back on spending, Rich Dad recommended increasing income. He thought it smarter to expand your means by increasing income. Budget deficit of a government. When talking about the budget deficit of a government, Barron states, a budget deficit accumulated by the federal government of the United States must be financed by the issuance of treasury bonds. In the previous chapters of this book, I wrote about how the U.S. government was financing its problems by selling debt, i.e., treasury bonds, that future taxpayers must pay for. The Social Security Trust Fund, which does not really exist, is filled with treasury bonds. In other words, because the U.S. government operates a budget deficit, the money that workers and businesses have been paying into the Social Security Fund has been used to pay other bills, not to increase the Social Security Trust Fund. See the diagram below. Budget deficit of a business. Barron states, corporate budget deficits must be reduced or eliminated by increasing sales and reducing expenditures, or the company will not survive in the long run. Again, notice the two choices. One choice is to increase sales and the other is to reduce expenditures. The financial statement of a corporate deficit looks like this diagram. One of the reasons Rich Dad recommended I take a job with Xerox was that I'd learn to increase sales, which increases income. For many businesses and individuals, increasing income is hard. For businesses that cannot sell, it is easier to cut expenses, increase debt, liabilities, or sell assets. The problem with cutting expenses, increasing debt, and selling assets is that it usually makes the situation worse. Again, this is why Rich Dad recommended learning to sell. If a person can sell, he or she can increase income. In Rich Dad's mind, increasing income, rather than reducing expenses, was a better way to solve the problem of a budget deficit. Obviously, if there are frivolous expenses, such as lavish parties, and non-productive debt, such as a corporate jet, it may be best to address those financially irresponsible problems before trying to sell more. Budget deficit of an individual. Barron states, individuals who consistently spend more than they earn will accumulate huge debts, which may ultimately force them to declare bankruptcy if the debt cannot be serviced. As we know, many people are in debt because they spend more than they earn. Yet, as stated in the previous chapter, one of the reasons people have less to spend is because financial predators are taking money from workers before they get paid. The justification for taking workers' money before they get paid is that most lack the financial intelligence to manage their own money. If our schools had financial education, maybe the workers could be trusted to manage their own money, rather than let bureaucrats and bankers manage their money for them. The problem with letting bureaucrats and bankers manage your money is they think your money is their money. Looking at an individual's financial statement, the diagram looks like the one here. People in the E quadrant often have no control over these four important expenses: taxes, Social Security, pensions, and mortgage payments. From this diagram, you can see how government bureaucrats take money via taxes and Social Security while bankers take your money via pension, 401k, and mortgage payments. This action is the cause of budget deficits for many people. A financially intelligent person has control over these expenses. The second type of budget, a budget surplus. Barron states, a budget surplus is an excess of income over spending for a government, corporation, or individual over a particular period of time. Notice the words excess of income over spending. This does not necessarily mean living below one's means. The definition does not say a surplus is created due to a reduction of spending, although a reduction of spending may lead to an excess of income. It does mean focusing on creating excess income. Financial IQ number 1, making more money. Rich Dad loved the words excess of income. This chapter is about excess of income, rather than reducing expenses and living below your means. Budget surplus of a government. Barron states, a government with a surplus may choose to start new government programs or cut taxes. There are some issues with this statement. Problem number 1 is that when governments create a surplus, they spend the money. Here is how government contracts work. If a government agency is efficient and saves money, the agency is punished, instead of rewarded, by having next year's budget reduced. To avoid this, most government agencies spend all their budgeted money, even if they do not need to. This means costs keep going up and the chances of a government budget surplus are slim to none. In other words, government bureaucracies are designed to operate on a budget deficit, and regardless of who is in power, taxes will go up. How Democrats manage a budget. You may recall from the previous chapter that Democrats love to tax and spend. Democrats love to spend on more government social programs like Social Security and Medicare. The problem is, social programs only grow bigger because they fail to solve the problem they are created to address. In order to counteract this, the budget is increased. And the vicious cycle continues. In government, mediocrity is rewarded and efficiency is punished. The following is a diagram of a Democrat's budget. Republicans manage a budget. The Republicans tend to borrow and spend. They want to expand the economy by flooding the money supply with funny money via debt. It's almost like flooding the economy with legal counterfeit money. Again, extra money looks like an increase in income, but in reality it is an increase in debt in the form of T-bills and bonds, which ultimately diminishes the prospect of a surplus. Many in the middle class do the same thing by using their home as an ATM. Every time their home increases in value, primarily due to the dollar's losing value, they borrow from their home to pay off credit card bills. Simply said, it's impossible to earn less. Borrow and spend more, and create a surplus. As President Clinton so eloquently put it, it's the economy, stupid. The following is a diagram of a Republican budget surplus of a business. Barron states, a corporation with a surplus may expand the business through investment or acquisition, or may choose to buy back its own stock. Notice the two ways to expand a business: investment or acquisition. A corporation spends to expand, or it buys another company to expand. If a business cannot expand via investment or acquisition, it may buy back its own stock. This stock repurchase may sometimes mean the company feels it is not able to expand the business and opts to buy itself instead. If this action sends its stock price higher, many shareholders will be happy, even though the company is not growing. Whenever I hear of a company buying back its own stock, I realize it may mean different things. A stock repurchase may mean the company has stopped growing and the leadership does not know how to grow the business. This is not a good sign for investors. Instead of buying more shares as the stock price goes up, it might be time to sell. A stock repurchase could also mean the leadership thinks its stock price is a bargain compared to the asset value of the company. If this is the case, then investors should be buying more as the stock price rises. In other words, a budget surplus of a business can tell you different things about the business and its leadership. Budget surplus of an individual. Barron states, an individual with a budget surplus may choose to pay down debt or increase spending or investment. Notice, Barron's offers three choices to individuals. These are, paying down debt, spending more money, or investing. As most of us know, one of the reasons so many people have trouble financially is because they increase spending and debt and reduce investment. Two choices when it comes to financial IQ. Number 3, budgeting your money. There are only two choices, deficit or surplus. Many people choose a budget deficit. If you want to be rich, choose a budget surplus, and create one by increasing income, not reducing expenses. A budget deficit. I have a friend in Atlanta who makes a lot of money. He has to make a lot of money. If he stops making a lot of money, his money problems will eat him alive. He has chosen to create a budget deficit. Every time Dan makes more money, he either buys a bigger house, a newer car, or takes an expensive vacation with the kids. He has another bad habit. Every 10 years or so, he marries a younger woman and has a new child. Dan grows older, but his wives are always about the same age, 25. Dan is an expert at taking a lot of money and making his money problems worse through deficits. A budget surplus. The second financial choice is to plan for a budget surplus. After making money. Financial IQ. Number 1, and protecting your money. Financial IQ. Number 2, learning how to budget for a surplus is essential for achieving financial integrity. The following are a number of lessons I have learned from my rich dad and other wealthy people about budgeting for a budget surplus. Budget tip number 1, a budget surplus is an expense. This is one of the best financial lessons my rich dad passed on to his son and me. Pointing to the financial statement, he said, you have to make a surplus an expense. In order to create a budget surplus, his financial statement looked like this. Explaining further, he said, the reason so many governments, businesses, and individuals fail to create a budget surplus is because they think a budget surplus looks like this. In Rich Dad Poor Dad, I wrote about the importance of paying yourself first. Budget number 1 is an example of paying yourself first. Budget number 2 is an example of paying yourself last. Most people know they should save, tithe, and invest. The problem is, after paying their expenses, most people don't have any money left to do so. The reason is because they consider saving, tithing, and investing as a last priority. Let me illustrate what I am saying. Again, looking at the financial statement you can tell a person's priorities. In other words, most of the middle class's financial priorities are, priority number 1, get a high-paying job, priority number 2, make the mortgage and car payments, priority number 3, pay bills on time, priority number 4, save, tithe, and invest. In other words, paying themselves first is their last priority. A surplus must be a priority in order to create a budget surplus. A surplus must be a priority. The best way to make a surplus a priority is to reprioritize your spending habits, make saving, tithing, and investing at least priority number 2, and list them as an expense on your financial statement. Easier said than done. I know most of you can agree with the logic of what I am saying and agree that people need to make saving, tithing, and investing a higher priority. I also know this is easier said than done. So let me tell you how Kim and I handled this problem. Soon after we were married, we had the same financial problems many newlyweds have. We had more expenses than income. To solve this problem, we hired Betty the bookkeeper. Betty was instructed to take 30% of all income off the top, as an expense, and put that money in the asset column. Using simple numbers as an example, if we had $1,000 in income, and $1,500 in expenses, Betty was to take 30% of the $1,000, and put that money in the asset column. With the remaining $700, she was to pay the $1,500 in expenses. Betty nearly died. She thought we were nuts. She said, "You can't do that. You have bills to pay." She almost quit. You see, Betty was a great bookkeeper, but she budgeted like a poor person. She paid everyone else first and herself last. Since there was rarely anything left over, she paid herself nothing. Her creditors, the government, and bankers were all more important than Betty. Betty argued and fought. All of her training told her to pay everyone else first. The thought of not paying her bills or taxes made her weak in the knees. I finally got her to understand she was doing us a favor. She was helping us out. I explained to her that she was helping us solve a very big problem, the problem of not having enough money, and as you know, solving problems makes us smarter. When she understood she was actually creating income through expense, she was willing to go along with our plan to create a budget surplus. For every dollar of income, Betty would take 30 cents and put it in savings, tithing, and investing. She knew that saving, tithing, and investing were a necessary expense to create a surplus, our first and most important expense. With the 70 cents from every dollar left, she was to pay taxes, liabilities such as our mortgage and car payments, and then our bills such as electricity, water, food, clothing, etc. Needless to say, for a long time we came up short every month. Although we had paid ourselves first, we did not have enough money to pay others. There were some months Kim and I came up as much as $4,000 short. We could have paid the $4,000 from our assets, but that was our money. The asset column belonged to us. Instead of panic, Betty was instructed to sit down with us and let us know how short we were each month. After taking a deep breath, Kim and I would then say, "It's time to get back to financial IQ number 1, making more money." With that, Kim and I would hustle around doing whatever we could to make more money. Kim, with her marketing background, often called businesses and offered to consult with them on their marketing plans. She also took modeling jobs and sold a line of clothes. I offered to teach investment or sales and marketing classes. For a few months, I trained sales teams at a local real estate company. I even made money by helping a family move, and by clearing some land for another family. In other words, we swallowed our pride and did whatever it took to make the extra money. Somehow, we always made it, and somehow Betty stuck with us and assisted us with our problem, solution, and process, even though she worried more about us than we did. Unfortunately, Betty could help us but was unwilling to help herself. Last we heard, she retired and moved in with her single daughter. They share expenses, using Betty's payments from Social Security to pay them. They do not have a budget surplus. Investing our money in 1989, Kim purchased her first rental property. She put down $5,000 and made $25 in positive cash flow per month. Today, Kim controls a multi-million-dollar portfolio and over 1,000 rental units, and it's still growing. If we had not made investing an expense and paid ourselves first, we might still be paying everyone else first. Savings, we saved money until we had over a year's expenses in cash. Instead of holding cash in a retail bank, we hold it in gold and silver ETFs, exchange-traded funds. This means that if we need cash, i.e., liquidity, our liquid assets are held by our stockbroker in gold and silver certificates, not in cash at a retail bank. As you know, I do not like the US dollar, because it continues to drop in value. Holding cash, or savings, in gold and silver also hinders me from spending it. I hate cashing in gold and silver for dollars. That's trading an asset that rises in value for a commodity that depreciates. God is our partner. As far as tithing goes, we continue to donate a large percentage to charitable organizations. It's important to give. As my very religious friend says, God does not need to receive, but humans need to give. Also, the reason we give is because tithing is our way of paying our partner, God. God is the best business partner I've ever had. He asks for 10% and lets me keep the other 90%. You know what happens if you stop paying your partners? They stop working with you. That is why we tithe. Coming up short, when we budgeted for a surplus, the first thing Kim and I found out was that we were not earning enough money. One of the benefits of coming up short every month was that we faced the problem of not enough money early on, rather than later in life. I suspect there are many people who are coming up short every month and will come up short later in life when their working days are over. Then it might be too late to solve the problem of not having enough money. As I stated at the start of this book, if you don't solve a problem, you will have that problem all your life. Problems rarely solve themselves. That is why we decided to pay ourselves first, early in life, even though we came up short. Coming up short forced us to solve the problem of not enough money. Who screams the loudest? When we paid ourselves first, the people who screamed the loudest were the banks and people we owed money to. Instead of letting them intimidate us into paying them, we let them intimidate us into increasing financial IQ. Number 1, making more money. Many people do not pay themselves first because no one yells at them. No one hires a bill collector to collect from themselves. You do not threaten yourself with foreclosure. In other words, we do not put pressure on ourselves if we do not pay ourselves. Yet we bow to pressure from our creditors and pay them. Kim and I use the pressure tactics of our creditors from our expense column to motivate us to make more money and increase our income. Budget tip number 2, the expense column is the crystal ball. If you ever want to predict a person's future, just look at the person's discretionary monthly expenses. For example, Person A, Person B, donation to church, 6-pack of beer, savings, new shoes, book on investing, new TV seminar on investing, football tickets, gym dues, 6-pack of beer, donation to charity, bag of potato chips, personal coach, 6-pack of beer. Rich Dad said, you can tell a person's future by looking at what they spend their time and money on. He also said, time and money are very important assets. Spend them wisely. You can tell how important a budget surplus is to someone by looking at his or her expense column. For example, just look at how much money is being paid to other organizations or people first. Notice that I put retirement as a liability. In technical terms, it is an unfunded liability, until it becomes an asset. And if you are banking on your 401k for your retirement, you will be paying the highest percentage in taxes because it is taxed as earned income. Compare that expense column to a pay yourself first expense column. Remember this, your asset column is your column. If you do not pay yourself first, no one else will. Through your everyday expenses, you and God, if you believe in and tithe to God, determine your financial future. Budget tip number 3, my assets pay for my liabilities. My poor dad believed in buying cheap. He thought being frugal was smart budgeting. We lived in an average house in an average neighborhood. My rich dad loved luxury. He lived in a fabulous home, in an affluent neighborhood, and lived an abundant lifestyle. He did not like being cheap, although he was still careful with his money. If my poor dad wanted a luxury item, he simply denied himself the luxury of owning. He said, we can't afford it. If my rich dad wanted a luxury item, he simply said, how can I afford it? And the way he afforded it was to create an asset in the asset column, an asset that paid for the liability. His financial statement looked like this. In other words, he acquired assets by paying himself first. With the cash flow from the assets, he then purchased his luxury liabilities. If he wanted big luxuries, he first created big assets. What many people do is buy big luxuries first and never have enough money to purchase assets. Again, it's a matter of priorities. The Bentley account 2 years ago, I wanted a new car, a Bentley convertible. The price, $200,000. I had the money in my asset column. I could have purchased the car for cash. The problem with buying a $200,000 Bentley with cash is that the car is worth only $125,000 the moment I drive it off the lot. That is not a smart use of my cash. Instead of spend my cash, I called my stockbroker Tom and authorized him to convert some of my gold and silver shares into $200,000 cash. His job was to take the $200,000 and turn it into $450,000. The project was named the Bentley account. It took Tom about 8 months, but he finally called and said, "You can buy your Bentley." I then wrote a check and paid for the Bentley with the cash that had been created by my assets. The transaction looked like this: starting balance sheet position, ending balance sheet position. The reason I needed the account traded up to $450,000 is because the extra $50,000 was to offset the taxes on the capital gains and the commission that Tom made. At the end of the day, I had my Bentley, and I still had the original $200,000, if I had just paid cash for the Bentley, without trading the account. The ending balance sheet position would have looked like this: would have lost my $200,000 in cash assets, i.e., gold and silver certificates, and I would have lost an additional $75,000 due to the instant depreciation when I drove the car off the lot. In the chapter on Financial IQ number 2, Protecting Your Money, I wrote about how good brokers can make you rich and bad brokers make excuses. The Bentley account is an example of a good broker making me rich and happy, allowing me to afford the luxuries of life. So, keep looking for a good broker if you don't already have one. Assets equals luxury liabilities. One of the benefits of being an author is that when I want a new liability, I first write a book, like this one, and the royalties from the book pay for the liability. The future transaction looks like this. At this point it might be beneficial to remind you what an asset and a liability are. In my book Rich Dad Poor Dad, I define them as simply as this: an asset is something that puts money in your pocket. A liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. There is nothing wrong with enjoying liabilities, as long as you continue to pay yourself first and purchase them through the income generated by your assets. In the example above, I used my assets to purchase my liability, and at the end of the day I still had my asset and my Bentley. Examples of other assets buying liabilities are shown in the diagram below. These are actual examples of how Kim and I use our desire for luxuries to make us richer, not poorer. As stated earlier, I do not believe in living below my means. I believe in first expanding my means and then enjoying life. A person with a low financial IQ only knows how to live below his or her means. In other words, cut expenses. If you do not give yourself the luxuries of life, why live life? Budget tip number 4, spend to get rich. When the going gets tough, most people cut back rather than spend. This is one reason why so many people fail to acquire and maintain wealth. For example, in the world of business, when a company's sales begin to drop, one of the first things the accountants do is cut back on spending. And one of the first things they cut back on is spending on advertising and promotion. With less advertising and promotion, sales drop, and the problem gets worse. One sign of high financial intelligence is knowing when to spend and when to cut back. When Kim and I realized we were in trouble, instead of allowing our bookkeeper Betty to cut back and pay bills first, we went into full-scale sales, marketing, and promotion. We spent time, money, and energy increasing our income. We did not cut back on expenses. In the workplace, there are many owners or managers who prey upon the weak, people who need their job and money. There are people who use the workers' weakness to make them weaker. For example, there are many big companies that cut your pay and/or increase your tasks to make you work harder. If you quit, they know that someone else will take your place. That is how the game is played. That was the way things were at Xerox. When I did well, instead of give me a raise, they cut my territory, increased my quota, and cut my pay. It was their way of making me be more productive. At first I got very angry. I wanted to quit, and I almost did. If not for my rich dad, I might have quit. Instead, Rich Dad pointed out to me that Xerox was training me in the ways of business. They were training me to do more with less. They were making me stronger. Once I saw the benefit to this way of business, I actually became a better businessperson. I learned to take the pressure and use it to my benefit. When Kim and I told Betty the bookkeeper to pay us first, before we paid our taxes and bills, it was our way of making us stronger, more viable for the world of business. Instead of crying, cringing, and paying when creditors called and threatened us, we used our creditors' energy to push us out the door to make more money. When people criticize and tell lies to tear me down, I use their negativity to make me more positive and determined to win. When problems arise, I use the problems to make myself smarter and to become bigger than the problem. Take it one day at a time. Budgeting is a very important process to learn and be smart at. Take the process one day at a time. Instead of fighting about money, Kim and I use the process to discuss and learn more about money and ourselves. Positive things did not happen overnight, but they did happen. If you will sincerely work at creating a budget surplus, your life will become richer. That is what budgeting is about, using what you have, even if what you have is no money, to make you better, stronger, and richer. How being poor can make you rich again. The definition of a budget is a plan for the coordination of resources and expenditures. You may notice this does not say a plan for the coordination of money. It's about the coordination of resources. A very important lesson from Rich Dad was that a financial problem is a resource, if you solve the problem. If you learn to take financial problems such as not enough money, a bad boss, or a mountain of debt, and use them as resources and opportunities to learn, you will slowly but surely create a budget surplus. The lesson my rich dad taught me about financial intelligence is really about being resourceful. He taught his son and me to be resourceful and turn problems into opportunities. He said, "When I was a kid, I was poor. I am rich today because I saw being poor as an opportunity, a very important resource God gave me to use to become rich." Good debt and bad debt. There are two types of debt, good debt and bad debt. Simply said, good debt is debt that makes you richer and someone else amortizes, pays off, for you. Bad debt is debt that makes you poor, and that you have to amortize yourself. Money causes some people to do goofy things. For example, many people do something financially insane, like buy a big house, put in a swimming pool, use credit cards to pay the bills, and then use the equity on their home to pay the credit card bills. This is an example of taking a bad situation and making things worse, creating a budget deficit. Our government does the same thing. Many people in government think it takes money to solve problems. So the problems get bigger, requiring more money, which leads to a budget deficit. A very serious problem in the world today is excessive bad debt. Bad debt is debt from a liability. Bad debt is a drag on countries, businesses, and individuals. One way to become rich is to see bad debt as an opportunity, a resource to make you richer, not poorer. If bad debt is holding you back, then you may be your own worst enemy. When people borrow bad debt to solve problems, the problems definitely get worse and bigger. My suggestion is to look at the problem of bad debt as an opportunity to learn and grow smarter. After one of my businesses failed, I lost nearly $1 million. After selling off personal and company assets, I still owed about $400,000. To solve this bad debt problem, Kim and I came up with a plan to eliminate all of it. Once again, instead of cutting back, we instructed Betty the bookkeeper to keep us on track, and we used the problem to get richer, rather than poorer. In other words, we got richer while paying off all that debt. We continued to tithe, save, and invest, all while aggressively paying off all our bad debt. If you would like to know more about how Kim and I got out of bad debt, we created a CD called How We Got Out of Bad Debt, and a small accompanying workbook to guide those who are in bad debt. You can order it from our website, rickadad.com, for a nominal price plus shipping. Looking back at our mountains of bad debt, I am glad Kim and I grew smarter at budgeting through our problem solving. While I never want to be that much in debt again, I am glad we learned from and solved the problem. When Kim and I were short of money, we used that problem as a resource to make more money. Rather than live below our means, or borrow more bad money to pay for bad debt, we used our problems as resources to become resourceful. And as opportunities to learn and become richer. Keep this in mind. Financial IQ number 3, budgeting your money, like financial IQ number 2, is measured in percentages, the percentage of income that reaches your asset column. If taking 30% of your income is too hard, then start with 3%. For example, if you earn $1,000, instead of allocating $300, or 30%, to your asset column, then direct 3%, or $30, towards your asset column. If this 3% makes life harder, that's good. A hard life is good if it makes you more resourceful. The higher percentage you direct to your asset column, the higher your financial IQ number 3. Today, Kim and I direct approximately 80% of our income directly into the asset column and do our best to survive on 20%. Also, we never say we cannot afford it and we refuse to live below our means. By continuing to keep things challenging, we become more resourceful, creating a more abundant life and a budget surplus.